Welcome to the Content Amplified podcast, brought to you by Masset. Our goal is to help you get more from your marketing content. Each episode is a 10 to 15 minute interview with industry experts that share amazing insights to help you squeeze as much juice from your content as you possibly can. Here's today's interview.
Welcome back to another episode of Content Amplified. Today I'm joined by Matt. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ben. It's good to be here.
Yeah. Matt, I'm excited for this conversation. We're going to talk about a term I haven't actually ever heard of before with content marketing. So I really love it. But before we dive into that, let's get to know you a little bit, catch us up to date on your career and some of your background. And then our favorite questions, what do you love about content and marketing?
Yeah, sounds good. So I'll start pretty far back, but only because I think it'll be relevant when we talk about the topic a little later. I did start my career about 20 years ago in magazine journalism. I worked for the official Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan club magazine, which was not hard-hitting, Woodward and Bernstein stuff, but it was technically journalism. And so
it's the coolest resume item ever, by the way.
Wow.
That is the coolest thing. I love that.
I'm glad to hear it. Yeah. So that was kind of where my career started. And then I would say about 6 years after I got out of school and had done that for a while, a few other things, I got my first job on the agency side in a PR agency doing account management, but also just a lot of pitching and a ton of writing, copywriting for websites and emails, etc. From there, it was pretty off to the races. I spent about a third of my career on the agency side and then the other 2/3 in-house. The past 9 years have been more of a product marketing focus specifically, but prior to that, I feel like I'd done pretty much a little bit of everything because there were times early on where specialization just wasn't quite as common as it is now, honestly, at least from where I sat. So the marketing manager, quote unquote, did just about everything, especially the stuff no one else wanted to do. So,
Yep. But
yeah, now I'm in product marketing and I've been doing that specifically, like I said, for about almost 10 years and I really love it. Content is something that I think because I had that journalism background and because I majored in English and I've always loved reading and writing in any shape and form, sort of organically felt like something I would really like to do throughout my career, and that's proven to be true. So I guess what I love about it is, facing the fear of the blank page. And then I guess the other part is just realizing, you've kind of hit a chord with something that you've put together, whatever the format or the channel is, that feeling when you might hear, whether it's internal or external, hey, that turned out really well, or I really learned something, getting that feedback is just awesome because it really, as much as you research and hope that you're going to hit the mark with things, hearing that anecdotally even just kind of puts the cherry on the sundae, I guess, in some ways. So.
I love that. That's awesome. Well, Matt, this is going to be a fun conversation. You've got a term that I'm really curious about and this philosophy and methodology when it comes to content marketing, and you call it outside-in thinking. What exactly does that mean to you? What's that term actually saying about content and marketing?
Yeah, so I guess it was kind of a borrow probably from some of the product stuff I've done as a product marketer. When we're talking internally, whether it's in any of the roles I've been in on the product marketing side, there's always that drive to be outside in from a product development perspective, meaning you're not sitting there assuming that you know what the market needs or your customers need. You're using as much outside information as possible to help influence that thinking, whether it's surveys or customer interviews or, any way you can to get that input is so helpful. And so, again, tying back to my journalism background and my PR background, the outside in, I guess, approach to content marketing is similar in the sense that it's far less about what you want to say to the market and far more about what you see in the market and how you respond to it, right? For me, that started with PR. When I was just starting out as a public relations, associate, the folks I worked with at the agency were really insistent that when we were putting together pitches, it wasn't about trying to get the best possible placement for our clients or our messages always. It was more about, you wanted a positive placement, obviously, but it was more about how you could package that in a story or a pitch that maybe reflected wider trends or might have a benefit to a reader beyond just, hey, come see what our company does, or come see this thing this, real estate development we're building. And so that became kind of a cornerstone of how we approached pitching at that agency. It also built really great relationships with the reporters, because they knew that if we were calling or emailing, we would almost always have something with a little meat on the bone, right? It wasn't just, let me tell you about this company that we're being paid to promote. It was, hey, here's this larger story or this trend that we're noticing. Here's how we might tie our clients into it. They might find they tie other folks into it anyway. So that approach, when I've developed content throughout my career, that sort of stuff has always stayed with me. And so that's why I think about it as sort of outside in thinking. It's less about, what you want to say, and more about how you can respond to what's happening. And then in doing so, hopefully hit a nerve or provide a little higher level of value than just the typical marketing copy or case study or, product one sheet, right? It's really focusing on bringing a level of value to the audience versus just bringing your message.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's a great concept. I think it's a great way to make the content relevant and really useful.
Yeah.
So obviously, kind of my next question is, how do we do that? How do we find the opportunities that we feel like the market's going to engage with? And how do we sometimes tie those into, like you're mentioning, common trends, things going on in the world today? How do you find those opportunities? Because I think sometimes businesses are kind of stuck there scratching their head saying, well, honestly, I don't know how our product specifically relates to anything going on right now, or at least how do I make it interesting and tie it in?
Mm-hmm.
How do you personally find those opportunities?
Yeah, that's a great question. It takes a lot of listening, reading, talking to customers, talking or reading magazine articles and subscribing to all the email newsletters you can. I'm like anyone, I have a really bad habit of, if I get busy, those kind of pile up in my inbox, but I do try to spend some time every once in a while going back through and trying to connect the dots. I've also been fortunate, especially in my current role. We serve the utility industry, and we've got a few folks who are in-house who have decades of experience in utilities. So sometimes, depending on your industry, some of the starting points for those answers might be in your team or in your broader team of your company, right? I was going to say in your building, but so many of us are remote now, that may not very well be true. But, you may have some answers, or at least starting points to answers, in the folks that you already work with, who have access to people in the industry, who have spent time in the industry themselves. So that's a big part of it. And then the other thing that I try to do is, if you think about, I guess, the different types of content that you can possibly do. The example that I've been thinking about with regard to this is, the classic sort of customer story, right? And there's always a desire to tell, a good story about how the customer has used the product and found success with it. And it's good to find metrics. But if you look at the value that they've gotten out of, say, whatever they've done with your product, there's always even a way to position that in such a way that resonates more as a best practice versus just like, hey, I bought this thing and I used it and now I've saved 40%. Hey, that's great, right? But like, if you can position that as, here's an example of a company that's utilizing technology in a way that's helped them make these savings, and you can maybe dig a little deeper based on your industry and try to position that. And then the solution that they've actually chosen becomes almost kind of, I want to say, secondary, honestly. You're drawing people in with a story. You're drawing people in with shared pain that they may experience in their work. You're drawing people in with an answer to that. And you're not necessarily just drawing them in with, come buy this thing or come see what this thing does, right? So even trying to find twists on sort of the work you're doing already in a way that might be more attractive to an outbound audience, or to the audience out there, versus just assuming you have the approach based on what you know internally. Even some of those tactics I find are really helpful,
I love that. So I love this concept. It sounds really more show, don't tell. Like you said, the example of, you could say 40%. It's much more compelling to say, hey, let me tell you this story about company XYZ, and here's all the cool things they did. And yeah, we were a part of that story, but here's how they saved 40%. And maybe a part of that story is that they actually just did some best practices that had nothing to do with you. but then it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah, I should do that. Oh yeah. And then I could couple it with that software and all that kind of stuff. And then I can see something similar. It seems like people like to take that step and put themselves in the same shoes. I think that that's really powerful.
Yeah.
So how do you get those stories? Like telling those stories, unearthing those stories, getting customers to talk to you about those kinds of things, helping them like actually find the data points and really, have that information. What are some, good techniques to actually incentivize and get people excited about potentially letting you tell their story?
That's a great question. And I think for anyone who works in content, when you're talking about telling, say, a customer story or a user story, that is, I think, one of the eternal struggles, right? Because um, there's always a desire to interact with customers, and it might be easier in some places than others, but then there's 1,000 complexities. I mean, I've had a case study at least once in my career get basically to the final finish line almost, and then get, shot down by, say, someone in legal at the company that we were profiling, right? Where they say, oh no, we can't say that. Or someone in communications says, oh no, I don't think we can do this, for any number of reasons. So it's a huge challenge. One thing that I've always found is helpful is to really talk to the people, or at least start by talking to the people who are excited about what they do, excited about what they've accomplished. Again, utilities is the industry I'm in now. I've also spent some time working on ed tech for K through 8 schools, primarily software for like grades kindergarten through third grade. And when you go into, say, a room with a few teachers and start to talk to them about how they're able to help students and use your product to do that, I mean, the enthusiasm is just off the charts. It's organic, it's real. And it's not something that even relates so much to your product, except in the way that it helps them. But you're tapping into, I think, like sort of just an organic source of excitement and enthusiasm. So I guess that's one thing that I've always tried to do, is try to make sure that, you might always want like sort of the executive cover of the VP of procurement saying, oh, this is great. We're so glad we spent money on it. But getting the people who are actually using it also in the story, that I think leads you to the kind of outcomes you want in terms of telling stories that matter to the audience, matter to the users, that they can identify with, versus, just the sort of standard case studies. So it's always a challenge to find those opportunities, those companies in the customer base, right? But once you've found them, make sure you get on the line with the users, with the people who it's really impacting on a day-to-day basis, in addition to the directors or executives who may have made the decision or implemented the product. You're going to get such stronger stories. And I think you're going to get the kind of thing that really people are looking to read out there in your audience, things that they can relate to and understand and get excited about themselves.
I love that. I think that's so powerful. And so I love you went and took it a step further. It's not just tell, it's show. And then it's even beyond that. If you can get your customers to tell the story about themselves, it's even better. I think that's so cool. And there's something interesting you mentioned in that K through 12 that I personally am a big fan of. If you can get more than one customer in the same room at the same time, there's this interesting energy where they kind of play off of each other and say, oh yeah, I did that. Oh yeah. There's this comfort level where people start to say, oh yeah, like, yeah, this reminds me, I do this and that. And they're just talking to their peers and they have a lot of fun with it.
Yes.
And you can kind of pull out some of that unique insights that I think is really cool.
1,000%. I mean, setting up, small meeting groups like that, like a customer advisory board, or even at bigger events, industry events, having, kind of a set aside, happy hour or something, getting those folks together. Obviously, K-12 or education and utilities are great examples of non-competitive industries, right? So, there's no reason why they wouldn't want to share that commonality and share those best practices. And like, you get those people in a room together, you're exactly right. It's like they speak a language that you don't quite speak yet, or you might be learning, but like the empathy and the connection and the information sharing is like instantaneous. And you're right. You learn so much, you can get so much out of that. That's such a good point.
I love it. Well, Matt, unfortunately, we're out of time today, but thank you so much for your insights and everything you provided today.
Yeah.
I learned a ton. I love this concept. I am now a huge fan of outside-in thinking. I think it's an amazing term. Really, though, if anyone wants to reach out and connect with you online and further this conversation, how and where can they find you?
Well, LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me. I know that, Ben, you'll put the link to my LinkedIn in there. And so I'd be happy to take messages or comments or whatever through that, and I don't know if I can take ownership of the term outside in when it comes to content or anything, but certainly if it gets me a book deal or a conference series at some point, I'd be happy to dive into it and keep going with it and just see where it heads.
Love it, Matt. I am really good at giving people credit for things that they don't necessarily want credit for, but I still do it anyways. So this is not you taking advantage of anyone else. This is me putting your name on top of it for you. So hopefully you like that.
Thanks.
Awesome. Well, Matt, thanks again for the time today.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Content Amplified podcast. Please subscribe and leave us a review. And for additional ways to get more out of your content, visit our website at getmasset.com. That's getmasset.com. And tune in next time to the Content Amplified podcast.